To truly grasp how chaotic the situation became, we have to look back at the very beginning, not just the legal charges, but the entire backstory. Tay-K wasn't just another rapper who made a mistake. His foundation was fracturing long before he ever reached for a weapon. Tamor Trayvon McIntyre was born on June 16, 2000, in Long Beach, California. For the majority of his early years, his father was behind bars. That isn't an excuse for what followed, but it is the reality he was born into. Eventually, his mother moved him and his sister Beverly to Las Vegas when Tamor was about 8. Once his father was released from prison, he moved the entire family to Arlington, Texas, allegedly to seek a better life. However, what actually happened behind closed doors was a nightmare no child should ever endure. The heavy details finally surfaced in court during the sentencing phase in April 2025. Beverly took the stand and testified about the abuse they suffered at the hands of their father. She detailed how his methods of discipline escalated from using belts to hitting them with 2x4 pieces of lumber, stating that the beatings only grew more severe over time. Now, pay close attention to this next part. She testified that whenever Tamor would cry during these beatings, his father would actually strap him down to an ironing board, believing the boy was being dramatic. Imagine that, a young child tied down and beaten with a wooden plank. This was the environment Tay-K was raised in. It was layer after layer of trauma before he was even old enough to make his own choices. Eventually, the state stepped in. Beverly recalled that Child Protective Services removed both of them from their mother's care when she was 7 and Tamor was only 5. They were placed in foster care, spent time in an orphanage, lived with a family in Las Vegas, and were ultimately sent back to their father in Texas, right back into that abusive cycle. By the time Tamor reached his teens in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, he was already drifting away, dropping out of Martin High School during his freshman year. He began connecting with local rappers and joined a group known as the Daytona Boys, heavily influenced by the styles of Chief Keef, Eazy-E, and Young Pappy. The streets claimed him long before music ever had a real shot at saving him. Then, in July 2016, when Tamor was only 16, everything reached a breaking point. On July 26th in Mansfield, Texas, the events that would ultimately define the rest of his life began to unfold. Two women, Megan Holt and Ariana Barat, orchestrated a robbery at the home of 17-year-old Zachary Bellowait. The plan was to seduce him, allowing an armed crew to storm in and seize drugs and cash. Tay-K was a member of that crew. However, they didn't anticipate the situation turning fatal. A shootout erupted. Bellowait was shot but lived, but his 21-year-old friend Ethan Walker was struck in the stomach and passed away. In July 2016, Tay-K and 6 others were arrested and charged with capital murder. He was just 16 years old. This is where the story takes a wild turn. While his case was moving through the courts, he was released on bond with a GPS ankle monitor and placed under house arrest. Instead of following the rules, he cut the monitor off and vanished. While a nationwide manhunt was underway to find him, he surfaced in San Antonio. In April 2017, while still a fugitive, authorities allege he met up with 23-year-old photographer Mark Anthony Saldivar, claiming he needed photos for a new track. They drove Saldivar to a Chick-fil-A parking lot near the North Star Mall. According to court records, Saldivar was beaten, robbed of his camera gear, and shot, left for dead right there in the lot. Tay-K was only 16 when he allegedly shot Ethan Walker, and he was barely 17 when this second incident occurred. But that's only the beginning. Even with all of this going on, he was still focused on his music. He recorded The Race, a song literally about running from the cops, while he was actively dodging law enforcement across state lines. He even filmed the music video in front of his own wanted poster. It was released on June 30th, 2017. That very same day, U.S. Marshals caught up with him in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and took him into custody. The track went viral instantly. It hit number 44 on the Billboard Hot 100 and eventually went platinum, all while Tay-K was sitting in a Texas jail cell, watching his fame explode. The internet was in an uproar. Fans were wearing free Tay-K shirts, and he was getting cosigns from major celebrities. Much of the culture was treating his story like some kind of legendary saga in the making. However, the reality was far more grim. The second those handcuffs clicked in New Jersey, the countdown began for the most disturbing chapter of his life. Nobody, not even Tay-K, was prepared for what prison was actually going to be like for him. The early days behind bars were chaotic from the jump. After being transferred to the Tarrant County Jail in Fort Worth, it quickly became evident that Tay-K wasn't planning to sit back and serve his time quietly. Almost immediately, corrections officers began documenting a pattern of behavior that would persist for years. While at Tarrant County, Tay-K allegedly directed death threats and profanities at a sheriff's sergeant. He would throw his food trays and wet toilet paper, and constantly ignored his allotted phone time. Officers testified that he was a constant disruption, taunting staff in the hallways, trying to physically grab officers and hurling wet paper at other inmates. It wasn't just simple rebellion. It was a teenager with deep-seated rage trapped in a cage, reacting the only way he knew how. Then, in August 2018, things took a truly wild turn. During a search on August 2nd, authorities discovered a mobile phone hidden inside his sock. Finding a burner phone in a jail facility is a major violation, and he was immediately charged with possession of a prohibited item. The facility's response was swift. On August 14, 2018, Tay-K was moved out of Tarrant County and transferred to the Lon Evans Corrections Center, a maximum security facility. At Lon Evans, they placed him on a 23-hour lockdown. That meant 23 hours confined to a cell, with only 1 hour a day allowed for the gym. That was his entire reality, every single day. Just let that sink in. A teenager spent 23 hours a day in a box. This is solitary confinement in its purest form, and the psychological impact of that kind of isolation on a developing brain is devastating. It often leads to paranoia, depression, severe anxiety, and a total loss of social skills. Essentially, the system took a traumatized kid raised in violence, threw him into an even more extreme environment, and expected things to improve. But the chaos didn't stop there, and it certainly wasn't finished with him. On March 1, 2019, the story took a turn that genuinely stunned the public. Multiple reports surfaced claiming that while Tay-K was in Tarrant County Jail awaiting his capital murder trial, he was attempting to organize a full-scale prison gang. He actually named it the Rugrats, inspired by the Nickelodeon show. According to prosecutors, his goal was to affiliate this new group with the Crips, since Tay-K is a self-admitted member of the Long Beach Insane Crips, and build a rival power structure to challenge the Puro Tango Blast, a Texas-based gang already operating within the facility. Prosecutors even filed a formal notice detailing the alleged hierarchy and organization of this new gang. Tay-K had drafted what they called the Laws of Power, a literal written handbook for the gang. The rules were strict. Never cooperate with police or guards if caught in illegal acts. Never steal from a fellow member. And never disobey a superior. One of the more chilling rules stated there was to be no hurting or killing of children unless necessary. To join, you had to be jumped in and voted in by a sergeant. Leaving was only possible if you were jumped out or received the blessing of 2 sergeants. The final rule was love, respect, protect, and cherish your fellow Rugrat always. Now, let's be real. This is easily one of the most bizarre yet concerning parts of the entire case. The absurdity is clear, especially with a name like that. But the truly alarming part is that here was an 18-year-old facing a capital murder charge in maximum security, and his immediate instinct was still to organize and lead. It shows how deeply the street mentality is rooted. It doesn't just disappear once you're behind bars. However, a warden eventually received a tip from an informant. As soon as the leadership caught wind of the Rugrats plan, Tay-K was sent straight back into solitary confinement. Just when he thought he'd found some kind of purpose behind those bars, the door slammed shut on him again, and prosecutors weren't finished. Their report also alleged that, along with the gang activity, Tay-K had assaulted another inmate, either by striking him in the head or slamming his head against a wall, resulting in the victim being rushed to John Peter Smith Hospital by ambulance. On top of that, he was accused of directly threatening a corrections officer, reportedly saying, "When I see you on the street, you better run." Every time Tay-K was granted any freedom of movement within the facility, his behavior escalated. He wasn't adjusting to life inside. He was fighting against it at every possible turn. Then, in February 2019, things reached a new level when a jailhouse photo surfaced on Instagram and sent shockwaves through the rap world. The image shows Tay-K at a visitation booth holding a prison phone to his ear. But it was what he was wearing that caught everyone's eye. A red, sleeveless garment. For those who knew what they were looking at, the significance was immediately clear. An anti-suicide smock. These aren't your standard prison uniforms. According to the official documentation, they are made from quilted nylon cordura, a material so thick and stiff that it can't be folded or rolled into a cord. The shoulder seams are designed to tear away under pressure, ensuring the armholes can't be used as makeshift nooses. These are reserved for inmates classified as an active threat to their own lives. The moment that photo dropped, the internet went into a total frenzy. They got Tay-K on suicide watch started trending everywhere, and fans were losing it in the comments. People genuinely believed the young man had reached his breaking point. However, his manager, Ezra Averill, took to Instagram stories to set the record straight. What he revealed was perhaps one of the most telling moments of this entire saga. Averill explained that the photo was over 7 months old and clarified that Tay-K was not actually suicidal. Instead, he confirmed that Tay-K had intentionally faked a mental breakdown just to get moved out of the solitary confinement he'd been stuck in for nearly 2 years. His manager's words were, "Crazy the extremes you have to take it just to be treated humanely in that situation. You have to really hear that." At this point, Tay-K was still just a teenager, and he had been living in near total isolation for almost 2 full years. And his only escape from those conditions was to convince the prison staff that he was on the verge of self-harm. That isn't just another prison story, it's a grim reflection of what prolonged solitary confinement does to a person. It's the story of a kid who realized that the only way to change his environment was to pretend he was about to leave it permanently. What does it say about those conditions when faking a suicide attempt is actually the most rational move available? His manager basically confirmed it worked. that the move was tactical, calculated, and successful in getting Tay-K a change in treatment. This implies the system was functioning in a way where a manufactured mental health crisis was more effective than any formal complaint or request. That is disturbing on a level that goes far beyond just Tay-K's case. By the time he received his first sentence in July 2019 to 55 years for the murder of Ethan Walker, the reality of his situation began to bleed into his public updates. His team was posting tweets, allegedly on his behalf, that painted a picture of someone desperately trying to stay connected to the outside world while life on the inside was slowly consuming him. On August 31, 2019, less than 2 weeks after he was sentenced and moved to the Bexar County Adult Detention Center in San Antonio, a tweet went out from his account. Send letters and books and put money on his books while he's in San Antonio. The post read, complete with his inmate number and the facility's address. Think about that for a moment. A man just sentenced to 5.5 decades behind bars, and his first public outreach is a plea for books and financial support. It reflects a level of loneliness and disconnection that hits differently when you really sit with it. Then came the tweets that suggested a different kind of mental unraveling. From inside the Bexar County Jail, Tay-K claimed his treatment was inhumane, stating he felt like a hamster. His direct quotes were raw. "I'm at war within. I feel like a hamster in here. They're literally treating me like a ferret in here right now." While some online mocked these posts as theatrics or jokes, his manager had already confirmed that the conditions were dire enough for him to fake a total breakdown. His complaints about being treated like a caged animal didn't come out of thin air. They were entirely consistent with the documented reality of his time in solitary. He didn't stop at the facility either. He also took aim at his own management and record label. From a cell where he had zero autonomy, Tay-K blasted his team for allegedly silencing him and failing to advocate for his interests, claiming he needed entirely new representation for his appeal. That kind of helplessness breeds a different category of rage. It's not the explosive anger you see on the streets, but a slow, corrosive frustration that comes from watching your entire life spiral out of control from behind a window you can't even open. In November 2020, rumors began circulating online that Tay-K's sentence had been extended following an alleged incident with a prison guard. His management was quick to shut these down, claiming they were false and insisting he would be home soon. But he wasn't home soon. He wasn't home at all. The appeals his team had promised eventually failed to lead to any significant change. Then, in November 2024, new court photos of Tay-K surfaced, leaving the internet in genuine shock. The images revealed a large prominent scar on the back of his neck. To this day, no one from his team has officially explained how he got it or what happened. That silence spoke volumes. Social media was flooded with speculation about prison fights or even worse scenarios, but the scar was undeniably real. It was captured during a public court appearance, yet no official source stepped up to clarify the situation. That detail alone tells its own story. Fast forward to April 2025. The capital murder trial for the death of Mark Anthony Saldivar officially began on April 1st in Bexar County's 187th District Court. Jury selection began on March 31st following TK's decision back in February 2024 to reject a plea deal. Rather than accepting the offer on the table, he chose to take his chances at trial. The prosecution presented a dark sequence of events alleging that TK and his associates lured 23-year-old photographer Saldivar to a Chick-fil-A parking lot for a supposed photo shoot. Instead, they argued that Saldivar was beaten, robbed of his gear, and ultimately shot and killed. At the time, TK was only 16 and was already a fugitive in connection with the murder of Ethan Walker. The defense, however, challenged this narrative head-on. During closing arguments, attorney John Hunter told the jury that Tamer McIntyre was not guilty of capital murder, or manslaughter. He argued that the reason was simple: a case must be built correctly. And in this instance, the work just wasn't done. The defense maintained that the investigation was sloppy, claiming that witness statements were biased and that the entire prosecution was built more on assumptions than solid evidence. TK's sister, Beverly, eventually took the stand to recount a childhood defined by abuse, mentioning the 2x4S, the ironing board, and the years in foster care. It was an attempt to provide the jury with some context regarding the man on trial, framed through the lens of generational trauma. A forensic neuropsychologist also testified about TK's mental state, highlighting a family history marred by violence, drug abuse, and prostitution. The defense wasn't offering an excuse, but rather an explanation. This is the environment that shaped him, the trauma that went unaddressed, and the system that failed to intervene. Closing statements were delivered on April 11th, 2025. After deliberating, the jury returned with a verdict on April 14th. He was found guilty, though not of capital murder. Instead, they opted for the lesser charge of murder, moving away from the most severe possible conviction. Sentencing took place the following day, April 15, where the judge handed down an 80-year sentence. Addressing TK directly, Judge Stephanie Boyd emphasized that the victim is deceased and that TK needed to truly grasp that reality. The 80-year sentence will run concurrently with a previous 55-year sentence. meaning they overlap rather than being served consecutively. According to updated records from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, his projected release date is now set for August 8, 2099. As of this recording, Tay-K is 24 years old. By 2099, he would be 99 years old. The math is simple. This man is set to spend the remainder of his natural life behind bars. But here is the difficult truth that often gets ignored. Tay-K's story isn't just a cautionary tale for the rap world, and it isn't just don't do crime content for a comment section. It is a full-scale documentary on what happens when the systems meant to protect children fail at every possible level, only for those same systems to eventually become the ones that cage them. The trajectory was set early. A father in prison, a mother struggling to keep the home together, and entering foster care at just 5 years old. Even his return home meant being beaten with lumber and strapped to an ironing board. Without stable schooling, he dropped out in his freshman year, turning to the streets before he could even grasp what the long-term consequences looked like. By 16, he made decisions that sealed a fate even a grown adult would struggle to comprehend, let alone a child who had spent his entire life surviving on pure instinct. This isn't about excusing what happened to the victims. Ethan Walker is dead. He was only 21 and will never get to live out his life. Mark Anthony Salivar is dead. He was a 23-year-old photographer just trying to earn a living when he was killed in a parking lot. Those families carry that heavy burden every single day. We have to be real about this. Those losses are permanent, and they matter. No cap, and Tay-K will be behind those walls for the duration of it. He'll be trapped in a system that has already documented conditions so severe that faking a suicide attempt felt like a rational strategy, just to get better treatment. This is a facility where he once appeared at a public court date with an unexplained scar on the back of his neck. He has endured stretches of solitary confinement that the United Nations classifies as torture when they exceed 15 days. Yet this kid was reportedly held there for nearly 2 years. Inside that structure, the only survival skills he ever learned, dominance, aggression, and never showing weakness, are the exact traits that ensure you are punished more severely and isolated further. The Rugrats situation is actually one of the most revealing insights into who Tay-K is at his core. Even when locked in a cage with nothing, he tried to build something. He tried to create order, establish loyalty, and protect those he considered his own. That instinct wasn't about random destruction. It was about organization. In a different life, that same drive is what builds businesses, leads teams, and starts movements. In the life he was actually given, those instincts were used to build a prison gang named after a children's cartoon. Now, the artist, who was only 17 when the race went platinum, is a 24-year-old facing a documented release date of 2099. His music still attracts nearly 4 million monthly listeners on Spotify, and the race remains a staple on playlists worldwide. His story continues to circulate in comment sections, YouTube videos, and scripts like this one. When the sentence was finally handed down, the reaction wasn't shock, it was resignation. The Free Tay-K movement on social media faded almost instantly once that 2099 date became reality. People had to face the gap between the romanticized version of the story, the young king returning home to drop the album of the decade, and the grim reality. Barring an extraordinary legal miracle, Tamor Trayvon McIntyre will likely die in the custody of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Ultimately, the culture has to reckon with what it chose to celebrate back in 2017. The same track that hit number 44 on the Billboard charts and went platinum at parties was essentially a celebration of someone evading the consequences of a murder. The internet turned him into a wealthy celebrity for that very reason, only to watch the story reach its actual conclusion. It's a reality far more disturbing than any song could ever truly capture. What does it mean that we turned the race into a club anthem when it was actually a goodbye? What does it say about our culture that we amplified the myth of the run while ignoring the gravity of what he was running from? Most importantly, what does it say about us that stories like Tay-K's keep repeating? We see kids from broken homes shuffled through systems that failed them, only to be swallowed by a different system that has no intention of fixing what the others broke. These aren't easy questions to answer, but if you've been following this channel, you know we don't look for easy answers. We look for the full picture. We keep it 100. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think there is any realistic legal path that could change Tay-K's situation? Do the concurrent sentences offer any real hope for parole eligibility? And as a culture, are we ever going to stop turning people into folk heroes when their stories end exactly like this? If you have something to say, leave a comment below. If you want more breakdowns like this, real stories with no fluff and all the details, you know what to do. Stay locked in, because the next story we have lined up is going to hit just as hard.